If you go through with this, don't expect to see your grandkids again. You're flushing our mother's legacy down the toilet for a girl who wasn't even born when you bought your first truck. That's what my son Mark sent me 6 months ago. He's a CPA in Philly, a smart kid. But those words weren't meant to help. They were meant to bury me. He sent that right before I boarded a plane with a one-way ticket and a knot in my stomach the size of a Pennsylvania coal mine. He thought he was protecting my 401k. He thought he was protecting some legacy. But what he was really doing was giving me an ultimatum. Stay in Scranton, stay lonely, and keep paying $1,200 a month to keep an empty 3-bedroom house from freezing or lose my family forever. Well, take a look at where I am today. I'm sitting on a balcony overlooking the council square in Brașov, Romania. The air is crisp, the mountains are right there, and just inside that door is Elena, the woman my kids call a scammer, who just spent the last hour laughing at my terrible jokes while we made breakfast. My penthouse here costs me less every month than the property taxes on that drafty colonial back in Scranton. And for the first time in 20 years, that knot in my stomach is just gone. My family did cut me off. They haven't spoken to me in months. And today, I'm going to tell you why that was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. But before you judge me, or them, you need to understand how a 66-year-old man who spent 35 years fixing HVAC units and playing by every rule in the book ended up burning the ships and starting over in the middle of Transylvania. Before I tell you how I ended up on this balcony, you need to know exactly who I was back in Pennsylvania. I wasn't a drifter or a guy looking for a shortcut. For 35 years, I was the man you called when the rooftop units at the mall or the hospital quit in the middle of a July heat wave. I started as a tech, crawling through ductwork in cramped attics in 100-degree summer heat, and I ended my career as a senior supervisor for a major commercial HVAC outfit. I managed crews of 30 guys, handled 6-figure budgets, and ran job sites with the kind of precision where a quarter-inch mistake was a firing offense. I was a man of checklists, torque specs, and hard-earned results. Everything in my life was measured, accountable, and built to last. I played the game exactly how they told us to play it. I retired with $310,000 in my 401k and a pension that, combined with Social Security, brings in $4,100 a month. In Scranton, that makes you comfortable on paper. I had the 3-bedroom colonial, the clean truck in the driveway, and a lawn I spent every Saturday morning obsessing over. I was the safe choice, the provider, the guy who never missed a mortgage payment in 40 years. I did everything right, every single step of the way. But here's the deal, and I want you to be honest with yourself while you're listening. They don't tell you how loud a big empty house gets when the person you shared it with is gone. My wife, Janet, my high school sweetheart, passed away from cancer 4 years ago. We built that house together, raised our kids in it, had 30 years of breakfasts at that kitchen table. After she was gone, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a cold, expensive museum. I was spending $1,200 every single month just on the privilege of existing in that museum. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and trying to keep the pipes from freezing during those gray Pennsylvania winters. And for what? So I could preserve a building that no one was living in except me and my memories. You know what it's like to eat a frozen dinner alone in a dining room built for 6? I'd sit there in the silence listening to the furnace kick on in the basement, which, to a guy like me, sounds exactly like money being set on fire, and I'd wait for the phone to ring. My daughter Sarah's a nurse practitioner, my son Mark's a CPA. They're successful, they're busy, and I was proud of that. I still am. But those Sunday calls started feeling like a chore I was imposing on them. 5 minutes, maybe 10. How's the weather, Dad? Did you take your heart meds? Okay, gotta go. The kids have practice. I was 66 years old, and I realized I had become a line item in their lives. A patriarch who was being managed instead of being loved. The aha moment hit me on a Tuesday in February. It was 10 degrees outside, and I opened a heating bill for $450. Right next to it on the counter was a neon pink flyer I'd picked up at the grocery store for a senior singles mixer at a local church. I looked at that bill, then at that flyer, then at the dead silence of my living room. I thought, is this it? Am I going to spend the next 20 years paying $500 a month just to stay warm in a house where nobody talks to me? Am I going to walk into a church basement, drink lukewarm coffee, and talk to some nice lady about our respective blood pressure medications? Am I just waiting for a nursing home to take the rest of my 401k? I realized right then that I wasn't actually living. I was just maintaining a legacy for children who only visited on Thanksgiving. That night, I didn't go to the mixer. I went on YouTube. I started researching places where $4,100 a month actually meant a life of dignity, not just survival. I found videos of Brasov, the mountains, the cobblestone streets of the old town, a pace of life that felt like the America I remembered from the 70s, back when things were built to last. I did the math right there on a legal pad. To keep my mind sharp, I joined a language exchange site called Tandem. I figured I'd learn a few phrases and maybe find a local to ask about real estate. That's where I met Elena. Now, I know what the skeptics are saying. I can hear Mark's voice in my head right now. Gary, you're an old fool being taken for a ride. But listen, I wasn't born yesterday. I spent 35 years managing crews and vetting contractors, and I can spot a liar or a lazy weld from a mile away. Elena is 31, yes, but she's a dental technician in Bucharest. She spends her days doing precision work on crowns and bridges. She's a professional with her own apartment, her own career, and her own life. Not some beggar looking for a handout. We didn't just chat. We had video calls every single night for 6 months, 4 hours a night. We talked about everything. My time in the HVAC trade, her dream of opening her own dental lab one day, the loss of my wife, the way Romanian culture views family versus how we do it in the States. I vetted her like I was reviewing a multi-million-dollar contract for a hospital renovation. I looked for the inconsistencies. I waited for the ask for money. It never came. Not once. What did come was a feeling I hadn't had in 20 years. She laughed at my Scranton jokes. She asked me questions about my life that weren't just, "Did you remember your appointment?" She saw me as a man with experience and value, not just an aging relative who needed to be checked on. By April, I couldn't stay behind a screen anymore. I booked a flight to Bucharest. When I walked out of that airport and saw her standing there, I didn't feel 66. I felt 30. We spent 2 weeks traveling through Transylvania, Sinaia, the Citadel walls in Sighișoara, and right here in Brasov. I met her parents. They're a few years younger than me, and they didn't look at me like a predator. They looked at me as a stulp al familie, a pillar, a man who had worked hard, saved his money, and earned the right to a beautiful life. I flew back to Scranton in May, and the house felt colder than it did in February. The silence was deafening. I was happy. For the first time since Janet passed, I felt like a man with a future, not just a past. I told my kids I'd give them the house in Scranton, no strings attached. I didn't need the equity. I just wanted my 401k and my pension to start over. I thought they'd be happy for me. I thought they'd see that their father was finally thawing out. But I was wrong. I didn't realize that in their eyes, I wasn't a man anymore. I was just a bank account they were waiting to inherit, and they weren't about to let their legacy fly across the Atlantic without a fight. They decided it was time for an intervention, and that dinner in Philadelphia was the moment I realized that if I wanted to save my soul, I was going to have to lose my family. I want you to picture a high-end steakhouse in Philadelphia, the kind of place where a side of creamed spinach costs more than a week's worth of groceries in Brasov. Mark called me in late May and said he and Sarah wanted to take me to dinner to discuss the future of the estate, now that I was talking about this Romania thing. That phrase, the future of the estate, should have been my first warning. Not the future of our family. Not, "Dad, are you okay?" The estate, like I was already dead and they were meeting with the executor. I walked in there with my legal pad and my folder full of spreadsheets, feeling like a man with a plan. I was proud of myself. I wanted to show my kids that their old man hadn't lost his edge, that I'd applied the same blue-collar management skills from 35 years in the HVAC trade to my own retirement. I thought we'd have a glass of wine and they'd say, "Dad, we're going to miss you, but we're glad you're finally happy." The second I sat down, I felt the temperature drop 40 degrees. Mark was wearing his audit face, the one he uses when he's looking for a missing decimal point. Sarah, the nurse practitioner, was looking at me with that clinical pity she probably uses for patients who can't remember what day of the week it is. I started to open my folder. "Listen," I said, "here's the deal. I've run the numbers. My $310,000 401k is just sitting there, losing value against inflation. If I move to Brasov, I can live like a king on my pension alone, and that cash stays in the bank as a massive safety net. I'm even willing to give you the house in Scranton right now, no strings attached. I just want my freedom." Mark didn't even look at my spreadsheets. He pushed them aside like junk mail, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, we've already talked to a lawyer. We're concerned about your capacity. We think this Elena is a professional scammer, and we think you're showing signs of early onset cognitive decline. We're prepared to petition the court for power of attorney if you don't call this off and move into that assisted living community in Wilkes-Barre we looked at last year." I felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a frozen pipe. Cognitive decline? I was 66 years old. I was still doing my own taxes, managing my own investments, and I just spent 6 months learning the basics of a foreign language. I looked at Sarah, hoping for backup, but she just nodded. "Dad, men your age are vulnerable. You're lonely, and this girl is 31. It's a textbook romance scam. We're just trying to protect Mother's legacy." And that's when it clicked. Mother's legacy. They weren't talking about Janet's memories or her garden or her old cookbooks. They were talking about the $310,000 in my 401k. They were talking about the equity in the house. They had already divided that money in their minds. To them, I wasn't a man who had worked 35 years in the heat and the cold so I could finally have a life of my own. I was just a biological safe deposit box trying to walk away with the contents. I looked at Mark and said, "I wasn't born yesterday. I've vetted Elena more thoroughly than you vet your tax clients. She's a dental technician. She has a career. She has never asked me for a single dime. Can you say the same? Because it seems to me like you're the ones trying to get your hands on my money before I'm even in the ground." That's when Mark went for the nuclear option. He leaned in and said, "If you go through with this, Gary, don't expect to see your grandkids again. You're dead to us." They expected me to fold. They expected the old Gary to say, "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll stay." As I drove back to Scranton that night, the knot in my stomach wasn't from fear. It was from cold, hard clarity. If my children were more worried about my bank account than my heartbeat, they had already cut me off emotionally years ago. I was just a line item in their lives, and if I stayed, I wasn't staying for family. I was staying for a lie. That was the night I decided to burn the ships. The next 3 months were a tactical operation. I didn't tell them my plans. I didn't argue. I didn't fire back at Mark's texts. I just went to work, quietly and methodically, the same way I'd managed every big job site for 35 years. I contacted a real estate agent and told her I wanted the house sold fast, cash offers only. I spent my weekends going through 30 years of accumulated life. I gave away Janet's old furniture to neighbors and young couples who actually needed it. I sold the truck. I donated half my closet to the Salvation Army. I packed my life into 2 oversized suitcases and didn't look back. Every time Mark or Sarah called to check in, which really meant check to see if I'd given up, I played it cool. I told them I was thinking about their suggestions, but in reality, I was at the bank setting up international wire transfers. I was at the consulate finalizing my long-stay D-type visa. I was watching Elena on video every night, and she was the only thing keeping me sane while my legacy was being dismantled brick by brick. The hardest part was the day the house sold. Walking through those empty rooms one last time, hearing the echo of my boots on the hardwood floors, It was haunting in a way I hadn't expected. I remembered Sarah's first steps in that hallway. I remembered Mark's high school graduation party in the backyard, the way Janet wore that yellow dress she loved. For a split second, I felt that good father guilt trying to pull me back. I thought, am I really doing this? Am I really choosing a life in Romania over my own children? Then I looked at my phone. I had a text from Mark. It wasn't, I love you, Dad. It wasn't, we'll miss you. It was, have you moved the 401k into the joint trust yet? We need to protect those assets from the foreign tax authorities. That was all I needed. I walked out of that house, locked the door for the last time, and handed the keys to the new owner. I went straight to the bank and wired every cent, all $310,000, to my new account in Romania. I wasn't mentally compromised. I wasn't a confused old man. I was finally, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly free. I want you to imagine the moment the wheels hit the tarmac at Otopeni Airport in Bucharest. That's the sound of a ship burning. I didn't have a return ticket. I didn't have a house to go back to. I didn't have the blessing of the two people I raised. All I had was two oversized suitcases, my 401k wired to a Romanian bank account, and the sight of Elena waving at me from the curb. We drove straight to Brasov. If you've never seen the Carpathian Mountains at sunset, you're missing one of God's greatest pieces of engineering. The peaks catch the light in a way that makes them look like they were hand-painted. As we pulled into the council square, Piazza Sfatului as they call it, I felt like I had stepped out of a black and white movie and into full Technicolor. The air didn't smell like Pennsylvania road salt and exhaust. It smelled like wood smoke, fresh bread, and history. For the first time in 4 years, I took a deep breath and it didn't feel like I was just filling my lungs. It felt like I was filling something deeper. Let's talk brass tacks, because I know that's why you're here. You want to know if the math actually works when the rubber meets the road. Here is the unvarnished reality of my life today. I live in a 2-bedroom penthouse right in the Old Town. It has exposed wooden beams, a view of the Brasov sign on Tumpa Mountain that honestly looks like the Hollywood sign, and a kitchen that would make a professional chef weep. Back in Scranton, I was paying $1,200 a month just to keep a drafty colonial from falling apart, and that was before I even turned on the lights or ate a piece of toast. Here, my rent is $600. $600 for a luxury apartment in the most beautiful city in the country. My utilities, including high-speed internet that's faster than anything I had in Philly, run me about $90 a month. Every morning I walk down those cobblestone stairs and hit the cafe on the corner. I sit there for an hour, watching the city wake up, the bakers opening their shutters, the pigeons working the square, the tourists stopping to take photos of the Black Church. A coffee and a fresh pastry costs me about $3. I'm not a line item here. The waiter knows my name. The guy at the butcher shop knows I like my cuts thick and asks about Elena when she's not with me. I'm not just an old man waiting for the clock to run out. I'm Gary, the American neighbor, and I'm part of the fabric of this neighborhood. For lunch, Elena and I usually go to a local spot. A 3-course meal, a big bowl of ciorba de burtă, a main course of sarmal, and a cold Ursus beer costs about $18 for the two of us. $18. Back home, that wouldn't even cover the tip and the parking at a decent steakhouse. I'm living on $1,600 a month total. That includes dining out 4 nights a week, groceries that actually taste like food instead of plastic, and weekend trips to salt mines and medieval castles. But it's not just the money. In Scranton, I was always one bad knee away from a financial catastrophe. My U.S. health insurance was a maze of deductibles and out-of-network traps that kept me awake at night. Here, I walked into the Regina Maria Clinic. It looks like a 5-star hotel, by the way, and signed up for a premium private health package. It cost me $1,100, not per month, per year. That covers specialists, scans, blood work, the works. I don't lie awake anymore worrying I'm one hospital stay away from being homeless. And then there's the wedding. We did it in a small, white-walled Orthodox church, quiet, smelling of beeswax and incense. I stood there in my best suit, and when I looked over my shoulder, the pews on my side were empty. No Mark, no Sarah, No grandkids and little clip-on ties. It stung. I'd be a liar if I said it didn't. But then I looked at the other side of the aisle. Elena's parents, her cousins, her friends, all there. They didn't look at me like a wallet or a scandal. They looked at me as a stulp al familie, a pillar. A man who had worked 35 years in the trenches, saved his money, and had the courage to choose happiness over a slow death in a cold house. After the ceremony, Elena's father poured me a glass of homemade tuica, looked me in the eye, and gave me a hug that felt more like family than anything I'd received in Pennsylvania in a decade. And then, about 2 months ago, Elena sat me down on this very balcony. She had that precision look she gets when she's working on a dental crown, and she handed me a small plastic stick. I'm 66 years old. In the States, people my age are supposed to be picking out their spot in the cemetery and making sure their life insurance is paid up so their kids can have a nice payday. But standing there in the Romanian sun, I realized I'm not at the end of my story. I'm at the beginning. Elena is pregnant. I am going to be a father again. I'm going to have a child with a woman who adores me, in a country that respects me, using a 401k that's being spent on life instead of just being managed by a CPA in Philly waiting for me to die. My $310,000 would have lasted maybe 8 years in a Pennsylvania nursing home. Here in Brasov, combined with my pension, it's going to provide a life for my new child for the next 25 years. Everything I did, the due diligence, the vetting, the burning of the ships, it all led to this. I took a gamble on myself when everyone I loved told me I was a fool. And looking at those mountains right now, listening to Elena hum in the kitchen, I've never felt smarter in my entire life. The sun is just starting to dip behind the peak of Tampa Mountain. Elena just brought me a coffee, $3 for the beans, and gave my shoulder a squeeze before heading back inside to work on some dental schematics. This is my life. It's not a vacation, it's not a dream, it's a Tuesday. Let's look at the cold, hard numbers one last time, because as an HVAC guy, I don't trust anything I can't measure. I'm living on $1,600 a month total, $600 in rent for this penthouse, about $400 for groceries and dining out 4 nights a week, $90 in utilities, and my private health insurance, $1,100 for the entire year. My $310,000 401k is sitting in a high-yield account, untouched. Back home, that money would have been liquidated in 8 years to pay for a silver-level assisted living facility. Here in Brasov, that money is going to last 25 years. It's going to pay for my new child's education and ensure Elena never has to worry about a roof over her head. I'm 66 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm not just a provider or a line item. I'm a man with a future. But I didn't get here by being lucky. I got here by being honest about 3 things that nobody wants to say out loud. 3 things I wish someone had told me years ago. First, inheritance is a gift, not an obligation. If your children are more worried about your bank account than your heartbeat, they've already cut you off emotionally. You might as well make it official. I spent 35 years crawling through ductwork in summer heat and winter cold to build that $310,000. That money represents my sweat, my missed weekends, my aching knees at the end of a 12-hour shift. It doesn't belong to a CPA in Philly who's waiting for me to kick the bucket so he can buy a bigger house in the suburbs. If your kids are holding your grandkids hostage over your retirement fund, they aren't family. They're creditors. And you don't owe creditors your happiness or your remaining years. Second, the real scam isn't a 31-year-old woman in Romania. The real scam is the U.S. retirement system. They tell you to save for 40 years, keep your head down, and play by the rules, so you can spend your last 10 years in a nursing home being managed by strangers who don't know your name. I traded a cold, drafty house in Scranton for a penthouse in Transylvania. I traded a $450 heating bill for a mountain view and a $3 coffee. Romania didn't just give me a lower cost of living, it gave me 30 years of my youth back. It gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Third, the age gap is actually a cultural gap. In the States, people look at a 35-year difference and they see a scandal, a punchline, or a dirty old man. But in Eastern Europe, a stable, provider-class man who knows how to treat a woman with respect is not a joke. He's a prize. Elena doesn't want me for a green card. She has her own career, her own ambitions, her own dental lab to build. She wants me because I'm a stulp al familier, a pillar, a man with character. Don't let American guilt and cultural conditioning keep you lonely in a house that's 3 times too big for one person. There is a whole world out there where your experience, your steadiness, and your hard-earned stability are actually celebrated. My children haven't spoken to me in 8 months. It hurts every single day. I'd be a liar if I said I don't miss those grandkids. But when I look at Elena and those mountains, I realize I spent 60 years living for everyone else. I'm finally living for Gary. If you're sitting in a big, empty house in the States, waiting for a phone call that never comes, stop waiting. Go where you are celebrated, not tolerated. If you want to know how to navigate the legal side of moving to Romania or how to handle the family fallout, subscribe to this channel. I'm Gary, and this is the second half of my life.